The reading today is from Psalm chapter 18, verses 25 through 30. With the loyal, you show yourself loyal. With the blameless, you show yourself blameless. With the pure, you show yourself pure. And with the crooked, you show yourself perverse. For you deliver a humble people, but the haughty eyes you bring down. It is you who light my lamp. The Lord my God lights up my darkness. By you I can crush a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The promise of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. Word of God, word of life.
Let us stand for the gospel.
The second reading is from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. As Jesus walked along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God. You may be seated. We're continuing our I Am sermon series. Last week we talked about what? Who can remember? I am the bread of life that comes down from heaven. And today we're talking about I am the light of the world. And there's actually two instances. Niley, by the way, I want you to come to communion first. Okay? I want you to receive communion first, because in the Bible it says the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So if she's got her 49ers shirt on. And so if we feed Niley first, then that means the Niners will be last. All right. I'm sorry. You can edit that out, Matthew. All right. So today we're looking at I am the light of the world. And Jesus actually says this phrase, I am the light of the world, 2 times in the Gospel of John. In chapter 8 and in chapter 9 for our story today, when he heals the man born blind. And I want to begin by inviting you to read the entire story. We just read 7 verses, but if you go home today, there's actually a 41-verse story, and it's one of the most amazing stories in all of the Bible. If you read through it, it's a very rich narrative, and we'll kind of walk through it today, but it's good to just read on its own. We have how many parents do we have in here of high school children? Anyone have a high school child? Anyone around the age of 15 at all? Yeah. 15 is a big year, isn't it? Every year is kind of a big year when you're a teenager, but what happens when you get to be 15 in the back of your mind? What's that? Learner's permit, right? Learner's permit at age 15 and a half, you can apply to get your learner's permit. How many of you remember getting your learner's permit back in the day, a couple years ago? I went from high school, and a friend of mine drove me to the office, and I took the test, and I passed the test, and she dumped me in the driver's seat of her stick shift car. And I'd never driven a stick shift before. It wasn't quite the same as your car, John, but John has an old 1921 thing that has a stick shift that doesn't even exist anymore. It's a very complicated thing. And threw me in there, and I had to drive and figured it out. But what are kind of the issues that you think about as parents as you think about your kids beginning to drive? What's that? You're worried about the other drivers, not your kid. Yeah. What else? Speeding is a big issue. When you take what's that? Texting is a huge issue now, right? Distracted driving. When you pass the test, what's one of the hardest things to pass the test? The parallel parking, right? If you live in New York City, you get that down pretty well, right? Parallel parking. But what's that? You never, yeah. Another issue that is overlooked are the blind spots, right? If you take your test and you kind of shift lanes without doing what? Not just the signal. Everyone says signaling. Yes, you have to signal, but if you don't look at your blind spot, they'll fail you straight away, right? You won't pass the test if you don't look through your blind spots. Now, here's the thing. Young people preparing for their tests have been trained and ingrained to look at their blind spots every single time they do it. What happens when you begin to get a little bit more confident in your driving and your abilities as a driver to your blind spots? How many of you, be honest, have ever ignored your blind spot and changed lanes at least once without looking? Huh? Right? We can ignore our blind spots because we think, oh, there's nobody around. I'll just change lanes without even looking. And blind spots can be very dangerous in our lives. Blind spots can be very dangerous in our lives. Today's story is about the story of the man born blind becoming able to see. And there's so much more to the story that we're going to go into, but it's really the story of everybody having blind spots except for the light of the world, Jesus Christ. The most clear, obvious one is the man who was born blind, but he is probably the least blind in the whole story. And we will see that the disciples have blind spots. Jesus' disciples will have major blind spots. The story involves the Pharisees. We all know the Pharisees are the religious leaders of the day that kind of are used to keep order to the people and keep control of the people from a social and religious standpoint. The Pharisees will have blind spots. This man lives in a community. He lives in a neighborhood in Jerusalem, but he has a little community of people that know the man. The community will have blind spots. This is shocking. His parents, mom and dad, have blind spots. Everyone in the story will have major blind spots. And when we don't know about our blind spots, it's very dangerous, isn't it? Blind spots, how many of you have any blind spots in your lives? Do you have any? I want you to, through this whole time, kind of think about what are your own blind spots. Jesus comes into this story saying twice, I am the light of the world. He says this before he heals the man. So here's the crux of the story. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. He, Hadiza, I don't know if this is a correct medical protocol, but he takes some spit and spits on the ground and makes it all dirty. I don't know if this is this would not be a good protocol, right? Takes some dirt, right, and rubs it over the eyes of the man, and then does what? Can he see at that point? No, he actually says, go walk to the pool of Siloam. And the man, not being able to see, walks by the sight of faith to the pool and then washes himself, and then finally he can see. But it is in his seeing that he will reveal the blindness of everybody around him. Even before that, Jesus has found himself at the temple right after he comes across a woman who is caught in adultery. I won't ask about that one. I won't crowdsource that question. The woman had been caught in adultery. We have no idea what happened to the man. It usually takes two people, but we just hear about the woman. Is brought before the crowds, and they are ready to kill this woman brutally with stones. And Jesus saves her life and sends her on the way. He says, yet let he who has no sin cast the first stone. And they all drop their rocks. And then Jesus finds himself at the temple, in an area of the temple that they celebrated a particular holiday called Sukkot, which was the festival of booths or tabernacles. And at this particular festival, at the temple area, which was one of the three big festivals of the year, people would come to the temple to experience the presence of God, particularly through light. And they had these great big lamps that would be lit up bringing light to the entire temple. It is here that Jesus says to the Pharisees and others, I am the light of the world. Those who follow me will never walk in darkness. Aside from the Pharisees, I want you to hear these words. They're very powerful in your own life. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. These words were challenging to the Pharisees. They were aggressive because throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus says, the Father and I are one. If you want to know the Father, look to me. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. In the very beginning of the Gospel of John, we hear, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it goes on to say, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Well, the Pharisees don't like this. And all through chapter 8, they're battling back and forth, even to the point by the end of the chapter, at the temple, they're ready to stone Jesus himself. That's how bad it got between the Pharisees and Jesus. And so it says there in the beginning of chapter 9 that he leaves the temple, right? Having declared that he is the light of the world, he is now leaving the religious building and he's going out into the street. Think about how many times Jesus goes out into the street, out into the lives of people, especially those who are marginalized, those who are going through great trial and tribulations. He meets those people and transforms their lives with the light of the world. And so Jesus leaves the temple, and immediately the disciples find a man born blind. Now, let's go over the blind spots. You ready to go through the blind spots? What are the blind spots of the disciples? They come across this man born blind, and they're kind of remember that they're students of Jesus, right? They're trying to impress the teacher by showing a great theological question to Jesus. They say, Jesus, this man born blind, whose fault is it that he was made this way? Who is to blame that he was born blind? Is it his own fault? Is he a sinner and that's how he was made blind? Or is it his parents' fault? Who do we blame that he is made this way? That shows a deep, profound prejudice, doesn't it? Right? It's a very ancient story, though, so aren't you glad that we've sort of resolved all of those issues in the modern world today, right? We've resolved these things, and we no longer kind of make a lot of prejudgments about one another based on how we look or appearance or anything. That's all done. Right? Are we right? No. That happens still today. And they reveal their blind spot. They can only understand this man's blindness through the old theology of the day, and they consider him a sinner because he was born blind. Jesus says something radical here. He says this, just listen to this. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind. He was made this way. He was made this way so that God's work might be revealed in him. Wow. How many of us have idiosyncrasies about ourselves or things that are not quite normal? And God says, Jesus says, he was made this way so that God can reveal himself through this man. And as we get through the story, guess what? His revelation will be made not just because he can now see, but it'll become much more profound and dramatic as we go along in the story. So we can kind of see the blind spots of the disciples, right? Now that he's healed, he creates a huge problem for the community because every day this guy, before he could see, would wake up and he would go to the street corner and he would maybe get a little tin can, get maybe a poster board, and beg for money. I don't know if anyone has here been in the situation of having to beg for money before in their lives, but it's not a pleasant existence, isn't it? And before long, the community knows, well, that's just the blind beggar. He deserves pity, he's pathetic, he's this, that, and the other, and all they can see with their own eyes is this beggar man, right? No matter what evidence else happens, all they can see is that he's a blind beggar man. How many of you in your family dynamics or in your households get labeled to be a certain way no matter what you you have arguments with your spouse, and no matter what happens, you just kind of have them in their category and in their box, right? When I was a kid, I used to be competitive, and no matter what, for the rest of my life, my family thinks I'm extremely competitive and I'm a sore loser. And no matter what I try to do, I can't shed that label from myself because they have me in that box, in that category. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, I'm in that category. So was this blind man. The community had no idea what to do with him, and all they could see with their own eyes, now we can see, maybe that's not him, and they were all confusing, and so they brought him to the Pharisees, right? And the Pharisees have their own great big blind spots themselves. They could care less that the guy can see. You know what their problem was? Somebody broke the law. Somebody broke the law. He was healed on the Sabbath day, and we need to punish somebody for what happened today. Who is it that did this? And you know what they do? They ask the man to tell a story, and he will tell this over and over again. I was born blind. A man came, he spit mud on the ground, put it on my eyes, I washed, and now I can see. He'll tell the story over and over and over again. And the Pharisees, looking to punish somebody's got to pay for this. They take him to his parents. And the parents discover their own blind spot in relation to their own kid. Who is this man? Is this your son? And they say, yeah, it's our son. He was born blind, but he's old enough. Let him speak for himself. They washed their hands of their very own son because they were afraid of what the religious leaders would do to them, and they didn't want to be ostracized. And so they say, I don't even want to deal with this. Now, through it all, this man born blind, who is in the beggar's category, tells his story over and over and over again and has no fear before anyone. And he tells the Pharisees over and over again his story. And they're sick of it, so they cast him out. Go away. You're not a part of us anymore. And that's where Jesus goes out and finds him, and he tells them, I am the Son of God. Do you believe this? And the first words to Jesus are, I believe. I believe. And so his story, his life, becomes a revelation to the world that he can tell the testimony that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And through all these things, the light of Christ shines in the dark places of everybody that comes across, right? They all kind of reveal their true colors. You have blind spots. We understand these blind spots to be rooted in sin and separation from God and different things. What do we do with our blind spots, almost by human nature? We try to hide them, don't we? We try to shutter them from the world around us. And we even try to shutter them from God so that God can't see our blind spots. But when we trust this loving, merciful God named Jesus with our blind spots, and we let him see our vulnerabilities, God can take those things and transform them so that we ourselves become light for the world and that we can let our light shine before others. I can't even begin to list the long list of blind spots that I personally have, but it's a long list. I want to share one blind spot that I have. It's a story I've shared before, but it involves my ministry in the Bronx when I was at Transfiguration. Life as a pastor is busy. It's very challenging. It can be very difficult, and my church had limited resources, and over time, something happens to you, and you kind of become a little jaded, and you try to prioritize your time and energy. We had a wonderful food pantry at our church. We served about 200 families every Monday morning between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock on Monday mornings. It was like a real center of life together in the Bronx, and people would come from the neighborhood. We lived in the poorest congressional district in the country. And it was a very well-run program. But what also happened being on our street corner, people would be coming through the doors Monday through Friday with all sorts of challenges and needs, and some people would come looking for money, and we didn't really have a lot of resources for money to give out to people and things like that. And so I became, my blind spot grew over the years so that when somebody came through the doors, I immediately went into defense mode. And so I immediately tried to figure out if this person needs somebody, is he trying to con me? Do I have the time to deal with them? And in the best case scenario, I can just get them to go away and not have to deal with them, especially if I was just on my own. So one day, it was December, cold December day in New York City, and I was in the church by myself. I had the door was unlocked because I was waiting for some police to come do some business. And I heard the door crack open, and I heard a voice say, "Hello? Is this the place with the food pantry?" And so immediately my blind spot went up, and I was ready to try to get rid of this person as quickly as I could, just because I didn't want to take the 15 minutes that it was going to take to pack a bag. And so I began walking over, and I found a woman with a heavy winter coat protecting her from the cold around her. And I said, "Yes, but our pantry is not open right now, and you'll have to come back at 1 o'clock on 10 o'clock on Monday morning." I began to try to push her away as quickly as possible. And she said, interrupting, "I have something for you." The previous week, our church had been in the New York Daily News, a little article about our food pantry, and it had gathered a little bit of attention. And so I was still confused by what she was saying, and so I now approached her, and she handed me an envelope. And I still thought there was something fishy going on, and I thought she was trying to do something or another. And so I grabbed the envelope, turned around, and I opened up the envelope. And in the envelope, mind you, our church has a budget of about $100,000 for the entire program of everything we do. There were a stack of 20s, and as I paged through the 20s, they turned into $100 bills. And as I counted through, there were $3,000 in this envelope that this woman had come through to bring to support our food pantry. Well, my blind spot was exposed. And I had the feeling of gratitude come over me. I changed, and I began all of a sudden to be grateful. And so I thought, now I'm going to magnanimously thank this wonderful person. And so I turned around, and she was gone. I ran outside the church building and looked one way, looked the other way, and there was nobody there. My blind spot had been exposed by the light of Christ, who showed me this great Christmas miracle that day. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. When we trust Christ with our vulnerabilities, when we allow Christ to use our very weakness to reveal his glory, and when we let God love us, that light comes inside of us, and it can't help but glow out into the world. May the light of Christ shine in your hearts this day. Amen.